The Gatekeepers are an organization that is established in order to extend the influence of the kingdom of God into the governmental realm. It is an event of things that we do from time to time to get the public generally aware of the people that are in office. The Bible says that when the righteous are in authority, then the people rejoice. But when the wicked are, they groan, they mourn, they go through trouble. And so we feel that our responsibility as church leaders, as pastors, in order to bring those people that are going to be leaders, that are going to be in government, the ones that we select, to bring them before us so that the church itself can do an evaluation. Because we look at people differently than the world does. Political parties look for an ideal that matches what their principles are. But the church needs to look at people also and evaluate candidates. Are they the type that God would have us to put an authority over us? So today what we're doing is we're having an intimate meet and greet with candidate William Bell, former mayor of the city of Birmingham. And we're going to talk with him. He's going to share with us certain things. And we're going to talk with him relating to issues that are important to us, or that may come forward from what he may discuss. So what I'm going to do in the next few moments, I'm just going to turn it over to former mayor. I don't know if you want to be referred to as that, or candidate, whatever, but we'll turn it over to him. He's going to have a few words to speak. Then we'll take questions from the audience. And this is being recorded, so it will be displayed later on, so the general public might be able to get this information. And I think we have a mixed audience here that will help us get the type of questions that we need and present those to you. So, Mr. Bell, that's the easiest way for me to avoid it without trying to figure out all the other formal titles.
Yes.
So I'll give you the platform to be able to speak right now.
Well, thank you, Bishop, and let me say thank you to those who have gathered here this morning, and those in the listening audience who are really in the process of evaluating what direction they want the great city of Birmingham to travel in. Oftentimes, as we travel down the road of politics and the political season, you want to have about 2 or 3 minutes to tell what you've done, what you're planning on doing, and most of the time that's not enough time. But I'm grateful for this opportunity and this format to be able to share with you exactly why I'm running, what I plan to do once I'm elected to the office of mayor, and really to set the stage for the city of Birmingham to move forward in a positive direction. Most of you know that I'm not new to the political process. I've been around a long time. Some people say too long. And as I was speaking to some other individuals earlier, the decision for my running for mayor at this time was not an easy decision. I was thoroughly happy chasing after my grandkids, doing all those honey-do list items that my wife had for me to do, and really living a life that God blessed me to be able to afford and work with so many other people in areas that I did not have time in the past. But there were several factors that came about that shaped my decision to offer myself to serve the citizens of Birmingham. One of those factors was the high rate of violent crime that exists in our community. And some people say, well, there's nothing you can do about crime. You can't stop people from doing evil deeds in the world. And I totally disagree with that. In fact, during my tenure as mayor, when you compare my record with the past, with all of the past five mayors, I had the lowest rate of violent crime during my tenure as mayor. The current administration has the highest rate. It is not even close in terms of how far ahead the violent crime has exponentially grown in the city of Birmingham. Each day you wake up, you hear about someone being murdered or shot or maimed in some kind of way. And that weighed on my heart because I know that, you can't hire enough police officers, You can't put a police officer in every home or in every vehicle or on every corner to stop evildoers when they want to do evil. But there are measures that you can put in place to address some of the stresses in society that leads to individuals committing crime. Oftentimes, you have situations where people are trying to access illegal gains. By that I mean they're trying to rob somebody or rob a place. And it gets out of hand and someone ends up getting shot or killed. Sometimes you have abuse inside a family structure where two people get to arguing and somebody ends up killing the other person. Sometimes you have situations where just out of pure meanness, just out of pure evilness, things happen. But you can address some of those problems by investing in our social structure here in the city of Birmingham. I was appalled to the fact that many agencies and organizations that work in the communities throughout the city of Birmingham have not been funded in the last 3.5 years by the city of Birmingham, where in all the previous mayors and administrations, those funds were available to help people who were in stressful situations, aid people in getting psychological help, putting resources out in the community to find out where are the trouble spots and how we can address those issues. We also looked at the fact that even to the point of being able to solve crimes for the last 3 years, previous 3 years, organizations like Crime Stoppers were not funded by the city of Birmingham. But it wasn't until a couple of months ago that the current administration called upon the churches to give money to support funding Crime Stoppers. So we had 3 years without funds going to that organization that worked so diligently to help our police department to solve crimes. There's a morale issue within our police department that those officers who are out there every day in the streets feel like they're not getting the support from the leadership within the police department or the leadership within the administration of city government itself. So those factors weighed on my heart that there has to be someone to be able to address those issues, to bring down those level of violent crime that's being committed in our community. Another factor that went into my decision to run was something that occurred a year ago this past July, when a statement was made by the administration that they were going to have to lay off employees from the city of Birmingham because of COVID. They stated that COVID had impacted the city's finances, and therefore, in order to correct that, they had to lay employees off. Well, it came to my attention during that same period of time that the city had received several letters from financial organizations that had indicated that the city, because of their previous year mismanagement of funds, were running about a $63 to $68 million deficit. And that in order to stave off those bond agencies increasing the interest rates that the city pays on financial borrowing by the city, that they had to do several things to reduce the operational cost of the city. And in that document, it specifically laid out that 3 areas that they could reduce the city's operational costs would be to lay off workers within the Public Works Department, lay off workers within the library, and lay off workers within the Park and Recreation. Those were the 3 areas that the administration identified that they were going to have to lay people off because of COVID. Now, when I started checking around the state, I found out COVID was all over the state of Alabama. But they didn't lay off anybody in Mobile. They didn't lay off anybody in Montgomery. They didn't lay off anybody in Huntsville. They didn't lay off anybody in Tuscaloosa, nor any other city in the state of Alabama. Birmingham was the only one that stated that they were going to lay employees off because of COVID. In addition to that, they took holiday pay away from city employees for over a year.
Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't right for the administration to try to find ways to reduce the operational costs of the city. What I'm saying is that in leadership capacity, those that you lead rely upon you to tell the truth and be honest with them about what your reasoning and rationale is, and that was not being done. And many people suffered needlessly, in my opinion, because of the decisions that were made to lay those individuals off and the way that they were laid off. The other issues of concerns that I have is that our school system is suffering, as it's always suffered, under the weight of lack of funding, lack of support, lack of educational opportunity. And when I say our school system, I'm talking about the Birmingham public school system. You hear a lot of talk about a promise program in which the commitment was made to assist students who graduate from Birmingham public schools to be able to get a financial support to go on to college. What a lot of people are not aware of is that $1.5 million to fund the Promise program was taken away from our Birmingham public school system to fund this program. To me, that doesn't make sense. Why are you going to take away money from a school system that's already struggling for finances and put it in a program to aid students who graduate from schools when you hampering their ability to get the proper tools at the elementary and high school level to be educated? I have no problem with creating a Promise program. I have no problem with giving money to students to assist them. In fact, my wife and I, each year, we sponsor out of our own pocket scholarships for individuals to go to the various schools around the state and even out of the state. But you don't take away the resources that support those kids from getting a good foundation before they go on to college. And so I have concerns about that, and we want to address that by restoring the educational opportunity to kids who are in our public high school and elementary school. We also have a lot of concerns about our neighborhoods. Neighborhood funds have been taken away from those communities. They don't have the ability to do small projects or to plan projects. And the rationale that is being given to them out of it, the administration, is that, well, it's just a waste of money, that all they do is buy hot dogs. Well, they do more than just have fun days for their community. They have small projects in which they try to use the framework plan and the comprehensive plan that was developed under my administration that has every neighborhood outlined as to how they want to see their communities grow. And they use those monies to do small beautification projects within the neighborhood. They use those monies to go and get consultants to come and help them visualize and actualize how they can improve the quality of life in those neighborhoods. Well, those resources were taken away. We need to add those resources back in. You also have a situation where the federal government is sending a tremendous amount of money into the cities all across the country. Birmingham will also receive millions of dollars. This is going to be a one-time opportunity for us to spend those funds to really change the quality of life in all of our neighborhoods, if it's done properly, if it's done fairly, and if it's done correctly. If you take, I think it's going to be estimated that the city of Birmingham will get in excess of some $150 million, maybe even more. Just imagine if $1 million was committed to each neighborhood. Some neighborhoods don't need $1 million. Some neighborhoods need much more than $1 million. But just think, $1 million going into the Roosevelt City community, $1 million going into Collegeville, $1 million going into West End, $1 million going into Pratt City, $1 million going into the Titusville community. Just think how that money can change the course and the direction of a neighborhood, from a neighborhood that's failing in a lot of ways to a neighborhood that would be very progressive in terms of attracting people to come and live in those communities. Just think what we could do by investing that money into the neighborhoods rather than just putting it in buckets, as was stated in a previous council meeting. So there are a number of things that I'm concerned about. Now the question is, do I have the experience, knowledge, and understanding to be able to deal with those issues? In 2010, when I was sworn into the city of Birmingham as the 33rd mayor of the city of Birmingham, the city was in a $78 million deficit. As mayor, I had less than 6 months to eradicate that deficit, to build the city's reserve funds, and then to begin the process of looking at how we can rebuild our communities in our neighborhoods. You may recall there was a tornado that struck over on the western side of town that was devastating to the Pratt City community. And I went out there to that community and I made a commitment that even though we had a financial deficit that we had to overcome, that I was committed to rebuilding that neighborhood, building it back better than what existed there before the tornado came. Drive through that community and look at the houses that we built. Drive through that community and look at the new fire station, the new library, the model programs that we put in place to rebuild that neighborhood. I know how to build neighborhoods. I know what that $1.5 million, $150 million funds could do to change the course of a neighborhood if it's done properly and correctly. When you talk about reaching out to the world, I had the opportunity to work with the previous president, President Barack Obama, to bring into the city of Birmingham the first national recognition of our civil rights district. Now, that wasn't done just for the sake of having the title of a National Historic District. That was done to attract people from around the world to come here to see the Birmingham of today, that what came out of the ashes and rubble of destroying a segregated society has now created a society here in Birmingham that all people are recognized as being human beings. All people have opportunities here. And Birmingham is known around the world. So we wanted to be able to showcase this. And there are millions of dollars sitting in Washington, D.C. right now that could be brought into Birmingham to support the National Historic District of the Civil Rights District. But it's just sitting there. There's no effort to bring those monies in here. I have the experience and the know-how to do that. And finally, before I take questions, we all know that we want to live in a prosperous city. We all know that we want to be treated equally and fairly. But that's not being done in our community. You can drive through some neighborhoods and they get city service they get services that they don't even ask for. Then other neighborhoods, they go by the wayside. They don't get the support that they need. And we tried to put in place a plan called the Land Banking Authority that would build wealth in all of our neighborhoods, that would give homeowners the opportunity to acquire properties next to them, or give first-time homeowners the opportunity to buy a home and fix that home up and put in place financial support to do that. But the land bank has been turned into something else that's totally different. Now adjacent landowners can't buy that property next to them at a small amount. Now when you see an abandoned home that has the opportunity to be fixed up and for someone to live in it, it's being bundled and packaged so that real estate speculators can go in and acquire those properties. That's not what the land bank was designed. And as the mayor, I will put back in place those restrictions that will help people who live in those communities not be pushed out because of land speculators, not be pushed out because they didn't have the financial reserves necessary to stay in that community. So as your mayor, I promise you, each and every day, I will be working for the improvement of the quality of life for all of our citizens so that everyone can live in a community that they appreciate, a community that they feel safe, and a community that can educate their children and give a comfortable life to those who have retired in those communities. At this time, I'll be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. As I always say, I know a little bit about everything, but not a whole lot about any particular thing, but I'll try to answer all your questions.
Thank you so much for being here today, and thank
Yes,
you
Reverend.
for being willing to jump back in the fight, if you will, in order to serve the citizens of Birmingham.
Yes.
As pastors, as ministers here, we look to the Word of God to lead our lives, to provide a foundation for our lives. Two quick verses that my question will be based off of. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, even as Bishop was talking about gatekeepers earlier, the Lord, and this was a foundational verse for us, the Lord instructed Moses when it was time to select leaders to be over you, there were just four qualifications or four principles there, if you will. He said, choose able men such as fear God, men of truth who hate covetousness. Psalm 89:14 talks about that God's throne is based upon righteousness and justice. The foundation of the Lord's throne is righteousness and justice. If I had just an opportunity for one question based upon those two verses, it would just simply be this. If you can, please share with us about your personal relationship with Jesus Christ and how that might play a factor in your daily decisions in terms of governing according to righteousness and justice. Thank you so much.
From the time of my birth, I know that God laid his hands on me. And for what purpose, I didn't know at the time. And what I'm really talking about, I was what was known at the time as a breech birth baby. And I don't remember, but according to my mom and my dad and other family members, my heart stopped. It had stopped to the point that they had really given me up for dead. But God blew life back into me. And my parents, because I was born at the old Holy Family Hospital, the one that's even before the one that's empty now, they raised me as Catholic. My parents all were Baptists, and later on they became Presbyterian. And I was the only Catholic in the family. And people used to always say, well, how did your son get to be Catholic? And it was because of the fact that when they thought that life had gone from my body, I was christened and baptized all at the same time by a priest there at the hospital at the time. Growing up, I was given the opportunity to make my own personal decision, which I knew God had blessed me and had touched me, so I didn't have a choice in making that personal decision. And all throughout my life, God has moved me in circles of people, in circles of knowledge and understanding that I didn't know why I was there or why this individual was sharing things with me, but it always impacted and moved me in a direction that was something good and positive for me. And I say that because I had so many friends who either died at an early age, went to prison at an early age, got in trouble or led a life not according to God's will. But somehow he always spared me, making me go home early, making me study a little bit longer in the library, making me listen to people who had my best interests at heart and not listening to that evil side that everyone has. And so, because so much has been poured into me, I was always instructed that if God bless you, he expects you to bless others. And that's how you can serve God. And I've always had a servant heart. And even now, I'm not doing this out of any ego. I'm not doing this out of any sense of entitlement. I just know that the public needs to have choices. The public needs to see who has the temperament, who has the knowledge, who has the fear of God, who has the qualities that you cited to be able to move this city in a direction that's pleasing to God. And so I know I've made mistakes in life, But I'm also a true believer that you recognize your mistakes, you ask God for forgiveness, and you try not to make those mistakes again. During my term in office, every morning when I would walk into that office, I'd pray that God gives me a hedge of protection, because I know we're all mortal men and women, and there's always temptation, especially in the realm of politics, that if you don't have God putting that hedge of protection around you, any temptation can walk up to you. Anything can redirect your real purpose as what God sent you there for, to lead you off in another direction. So every day I would pray that prayer. And I still believe that God, when you call upon him, will give you that protection if you recognize him, you give him the glory, and you humble yourself unto his will. Yes. Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Pastor
Again,
McClure.
thanks for being here.
Sure.
Good morning to everybody. I was taught at an early age in my family, it was a very open family.
Yes.
And when we sat around the table, anything could be discussed.
Yes.
As long as we respected one another, maintained proper character, integrity, the
Yes.
whole nine. I was taught that there's a difference between openness and transparency.
Exactly.
Openness is if I ask you a question, you give me the answer.
Exactly.
But transparency is living in such a way that I don't have to ask the question. My question is, how much transparency do you intend to bring into the office? Because it intends to be openness. We can call and ask the question, but and we get an answer. But we don't really have a whole lot of transparency. We really don't ever know what's going on until it's done. We're being told day after day that our city is being sold right from under us, but we're getting answers to questions that we ask. So how transparent do you intend to be in office?
One of the things that I worked on that we did not have the opportunity to do was to create an app. There's a young man by the name of Sri, who was head of my IT department. And that app would allow any citizen to go online and look at all of the finances of the city. Any citizen to go online to look at who's buying up property in our neighborhoods and communities. Any citizen would be able to go and find out why that pothole hadn't been filled and get a date and time. That way you could see firsthand what we were doing, rather than having to come and ask me what we're doing, because, you know, I'm going to tell you, hey, we're doing everything we can. But if you can see in real time what's really going on, then you can make your own judgment. Because I'm a firm believer that citizens and everyone should know for themselves, not from what they hear or somebody tell them, but they should know for themselves what's being done in their community and in their city. So we're going to work to have that transparency that you talked about. Yes.
Hey, Mayor.
Madam
I
Legislator.
always call him good looking, so, you know. Okay,
Thank you.
I have several questions, and one is, and I'm bringing this out because within our delegation, we call hell on. And that was on the pension plan.
Yeah.
And we had a candidate that was against the pension plan. Then we had the current administration that came for us to vote for the pension plan. And my question to you is, when you was in office, why didn't you do anything about the pension plan? Can you kind of expound on that
Right.
for us for a minute? And then I go to the next question.
Well, one of the first things that I was hit with in 2010 was the fact that it was projected that over the next 30 years there would be a decline in the amount of money that serviced the pension debt itself. And we began to look at issues surrounding that, contributions of the city, in which we made increased contributions, but it was always a one-sided situation. The state legislature set the pension fund up so that the city and the employees would pay equal amounts into the pension fund. Well, it got to a point after 2004, where the employees became, I don't want to say, well, they didn't believe that the city was dealing with them in good faith. And they refused to put any matching monies into the pension fund itself. And so there was sort of a standoff as to who would actually put money in initially. Well, my administration came in and we raised the amount that contribution that the city made itself. I think we went from, it was either 2.5, then we went to 5 or something. I don't have the numbers. I just know we increased it. And then my last year in office, we were going to increase that up to 12%, increase the amount up to 12%. Now, there was talk about funding or putting 100% of the money over in there that was required to end the gap in the funding itself. But what happens there, and where I disagree with the legislative action that was taken, if you require the city to make up the entire amount of money in one cycle, one financial cycle, if you get to the point, let's say if you had to make up a $25 million gap, the only place you're going to be able to get that $25 million fund to put into the pension fund is to lay employees off, because employees make up about 73% of the budget itself. So you would have to, in order to get that money, you would have to lay off employees that you're trying to help with the pension fund itself. Where the problem exists is that you're not going to have 100% of the employees retire at the same time. And that's what the pension fund, that's what it say 100% funding calls for. If every employee retired today, do you have enough money to pay their pension? Well, you and I both know that's not going to happen. But it should have a graduated formula where you can keep pace and not have any more gap or not see that gap increase. And I think with the proper management, you can do that. But with the requirement that we have to make up 100% of the gap, that's going to lead to financial hardship for the city. So.
Okay. The other question is, you and I have a mutual friend, and he made a statement. He said that, and which I agree, anybody can be mayor and run a city when things are going well.
Yes.
And it's when when we have a hiccup like COVID. So if you can tell us, how would you, if COVID had hit during the time of your administration, and how would you have, how can I put this? How would you have handled things situation as far as layoff and things like that, because of COVID? When we talked about, because I disagreed with the layoff myself, but how would you have treated that during that era with the libraries, the rec centers, the public works, the holiday time?
Well, first of all, the first time I heard about COVID was in December of 2019. That it had been, the World Health Organization had cited that it was coming out of China and that it could be very destructive if it spread throughout the country. At that point in time, had I been mayor, I would have started looking at what type of protective measures that we have for our employees. Do we have enough protective masks? Do we have enough, do we have the protocol in place as to who would come to the office, who would not come to the office? I would have been proactive as opposed to being reactive. Then the question became, if you got a highly contagious disease, where do you house people who become ill? My recommendation, and I told this to a couple of council people, I told it to one of the representatives of the mayor's office, that they should have taken a facility like the old Holy Family Hospital, a facility that's abandoned right now, and go in there and renovate that facility, create about 200 or 300 beds so that anyone who came down with it could then be isolated there at that facility. Now that does two things. It gives you extra beds that are isolated, but it also fixes up an eyesore in the community that eventually you would get reimbursed from the federal government. And that's what that money is coming down for now, to make up for any expenditures. You have to think outside the box on a number of these things. The question about laying people off, the city had reserve funds. When I left office, there were reserve funds. We also have what's called the Birmingham Fund that's there for emergency use. those monies could have been tapped into. In fact, they found money after they've sold the bonds. I think it was sometime September or October. They miraculously found money that they could bring those employees back. Well, that money was there all along. It was there all along. The only reason why they laid those employees off was because of that letter that came down from the rating agencies. I would have never taken that posture. I would have found other ways to reduce the operations of the city, like we did in 2010 when we faced a $78 million deficit, and I eliminated that deficit in less than 6 months. And we did a lot of creative things. It did not lay off one person, and that could have been done again.
And two other questions, and I'm gonna have to take my seat. I am a real advocate for mental illness.
Yes.
And what would we do as the city of Birmingham put together for mental illness? Because when you talk about mental illness, we're talking about our policemen, we're talking about our firemen, we're talking about our children within our schools. And there's a lot of it going around, whereas mental illness, we're used to hiding it instead of, attacking it. So what would we do about mental illness? And the last question is, do you believe in the term limits?
Believe in term limits. Mm-hmm. To answer that last question, the public term limited me the last time. So I think the public has the right to make a decision as to who they want to lead them. And not put a restriction on term limits, because the public knows when they don't want somebody. And I believe that whether I benefit politically or not, the public is always right. In 2017, when they made a decision to change leadership, they were right. They wanted to change. They got the change. Now the question is, are they happy with the change they got? The other, could you repeat the other? That's one of our biggest problems as it relates to the homeless. That's one of our biggest problems as it relates to calls that the police department have to make dealing with individuals who have mental problems. Many years ago, there's a friend of mine, his name was Benjamin Green, but we called him Benny Red. Benny Red played basketball at Parker High School. He was with one of the nationally ranked high school teams that Parker had during that period of time. He went off to Vietnam. He came under a lot of stress. He had a lot of mental issues that, as long as he was taking his medication, he was under control. He lived by himself over in the West End community, and this was in the 1980s, somewhere along there. And as I was driving down Jefferson Avenue and passed by his home, the police had the road cordoned off. And I saw Bennett standing in his front yard. He had a gun in his hand, true enough. But what had happened, there were some kids who had been teasing him. They were throwing trash in his yard. And he got the gun. The gun was inoperable. Police didn't know that. But because no one had his mental history, and no one could be called upon to say, okay, he's harmless, the gun that he has is not real or it's not working, his life could have been changed. But he was killed with 9 shots to his body. Some people could say, well, the police, overreacted. What they didn't know, all they saw was an individual with a gun. They didn't know. But had we invested more in setting up a mental health hotline to the police department, to have social workers who are familiar with mental patients all across this city that can be with the first responders to go in there and de-escalate those type situations. But it requires investments in that, not just from the city, but it also requires investment from the state. Ever since there was a ruling by the Supreme Court about housing the mentally ill, we've had a problem with homelessness in Birmingham. And Birmingham and Jefferson County is the largest contributor to those individuals who have mental problems because we're the largest city in the state. We've got to come up with ways that we can address that at the state level, but also with programs at the local level so that our police officers are not social workers. When a police officer show up, he has a gun and a taser on his hip, and they're trained to use those guns and tasers. we can't expect them to have all the social skills necessary to de-escalate. We would like for them to do that, but we can't expect them to do that. So we've got to invest in the people who can go in and de-escalate those type situations. And it would also help to relieve our homeless population if we invested more in treatment, in shelters. In fact, I've got a meeting with the head of the UAB psychiatric department to talk about exactly that, so I can be educated as to what the new tools are that we can utilize for that purpose.
Good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
One question, many people would say, you said something about the school systems.
Yes.
Now, many people would say it was suffered under your previous administration. And when you spoke about it today, it seems like you're realizing that there may need to be some changes, but you really didn't speak too much of any different things that you had done in the past. What would you do differently now versus what you had done in the past to help the school system be better?
Let me be very candid with you on something. You know, one of the issues that a lot of people bring up, say William Bell sold the waterworks. Have you heard that before?
Yes, sir.
And I asked I'm gonna get to your question, but I asked the question, I asked two questions. Who did I sell it to and why was it sold? Most people don't answer that first question. Who was it sold to? The assets of the waterworks was transferred back to the Birmingham Waterworks Board. If you go and look at who owns the Birmingham Waterworks Board, it's the city of Birmingham. Okay? So the Waterworks Board was not sold. The assets was transferred back to them where it's been there since the 1950s. Now, when that transaction took place, it generated some $297 million, $397 million. $197 million of those funds were utilized to build new schools in our community. A lot of people try to give Larry Langford credit for building all these new schools. He built some with that 1 cent sales tax that the county issued, but most of that money was used to build up county schools. In Birmingham, George Washington Carver High School was the first school that was built with that $197 million that came from the transfer of the assets of the waterworks. Why was George Washington Carver selected? Just the other day, I met Mr. Debro, who was I think he was the last principal at the old Carver High School that sat in the middle of Collegeville. He had invited me to come out to his school one day, and I went out there. I was president of the city council. No, I was the interim mayor in 1999. I went out there to the school. It was raining that day. Water was coming in under the door because Carver was built in a floodplain. And anytime you get heavy rain, the water would come in there, and you could see the water marks on the wall. He also showed me a room that was stacked high as the column back there with computers, brand new computers. And I'm looking in the classroom, and the kids didn't have the computers in the classroom. He said the electrical wiring in the school system was not capable of handling those computers if they were plugged up. Now, how do we expect our kids to learn if they don't have a science lab that's fully equipped, if they don't have computers and a Wi-Fi network that they could go online? That was my motivation for generating that $197 million, that we could take Carver High School out of the floodplain and put it up on that hill that when you drive up 65, you see George Washington Carver sitting there. That's the first thing that I did, to put new schools in our community. We built some new schools and we renovated some new schools. The other thing that we did, we started investing in reading programs, because it was shown that if a child can't read at the third grade level, by the time they get to the third grade, they have a high probability of not walking across that stage in high school receiving their diploma, or they have a higher probability of ending up in jail, or a higher probability of living a life in poverty. So we invested in the reading programs for the school system. You may recall when the state superintendent took over the finances of the Birmingham school system. They've sent one of the former state superintendents in here to manage the day-to-day financial operations of the city. The school board, which was led by the current administration, They sat over there twisting their finger, twiddling their thumbs, didn't know what to do. Quietly, I started negotiating with the state. What is needed to get you all out of Birmingham? They said, well, if the school system builds up its reserve to a certain level, then we'll leave. There was only one way that they could do that. The city of Birmingham bought up all of their old abandoned schools. Norwood, Kirby, 3 or 4 on the western side of town. We bought those up and we gave them cash money that they then took that cash money to put it in the reserve fund. And that's why the state left, got out of overseeing the finances of the school system and left out of here. Now, people want to blame the mayor for a lot of things as it relates to the school system. But the mayor doesn't appoint one person over there. The mayor doesn't have any control over the superintendent. In fact, one election cycle, I said that I would like for the mayor to have the appointment power of the superintendent so you can hold the mayor accountable if the superintendent doesn't do their job. Because we had a revolving door of superintendents. I mean, they just came and went, came and went, came and went. So it's not that I didn't do what I was supposed to do at the time. It's just that there were so many obstacles in the way. Physical obstacles, the school building, economic obstacles, not having the revenue and the income. Because if you go over to Mountain Brook in their school system, at one time, and it may be more than this, they spent about $10,000 of local revenue per child on their educational system. City of Birmingham spends about $5,000, and it hadn't increased. And when you got inflation and all these other things, and people pull kids out to take them to other schools, and they pull them out for different reasons. When you go out to Gardendale, check out where some of the good running backs for Gardendale High School come from. Come out of Collegeville. Go over to Hoover. Find out where some of the good baseball players and basketball players come. Their parents took them out of Birmingham and moved them over there. So there are a lot of reasons why kids leave the school system, but each time that child walks away from that school system, dollars walk away from them as well. We've got to be able to stabilize the number of kids who are in our school system and build upon that so that a family, a young couple who gets married and they move into Birmingham and they start their home in Birmingham, but then they have a kid, and by the time the kid reaches about 4 or 5, they start saying, well, we got to move because we want our kids in a better school. We got to provide them that better school for them to be there. Both my kids graduated from public school. All of my grandkids are in public schools now. So we've got to invest in that, and a lot of times we keep waiting for somebody to ride in on a white horse to save us when it's up to us to save us. And so that's what I've done in the past.
Okay, my second question kind of leads to that question. You said many of our basketball players and athletes, they go to the other schools, and they don't just go for the school system. Some goes for the quality of life in the neighborhood in which they're currently living in.
Sure.
In your last campaign, they talked about the 99 hoods that they wanted to revitalize. Right. And in my personal opinion, I think in many times you sidestepped that question as to what your campaign was going to do with those neighborhoods. Now you state about revitalizing them. What is different now than then that make you know or makes you feel like you can come in now and revitalize those neighborhoods?
Take a look at the Woodlawn community and what's happened there. We work with several foundations in that area. We work with several church organizations. We began to build houses in those communities. I'm trying to think of the name of one of the housing developments that the city funded. It's not Woodcrest.
And I wanted to say thank you for what you did in Pratt as a citizen.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring up Pratt City because that was revitalized too. But in particular, the Woodlawn area, we use historical tax credits. We use federal dollars from our block grant funds to invest in Woodlawn that brought it back from a residential standpoint. It's not where it needs to be, but it's on that path of coming back into its own. We also invested in businesses along First Avenue North, businesses over there on 54th, 55th Street, all along that corridor. During that same period of time of the last election, we had announced that we were going to take the old Ramsey McCormick building and revitalize that building. And that was, I put it out there. And I said, what we're going to do is move the municipal court of the city of Birmingham in a revitalized Ramsey McCormick building. We were also going to move the police department from off of First Avenue over into Inslee. We were going to take the fire department, which is headquartered right now in Fire Station Number 1, which is across the street from City Hall. We were going to move that over there. Now, why would I move the court system, the police department, and the fire department over to Inslee? Well, first of all, Inslee is perceived to have a high crime rate, right? During that period of time, people were getting killed over there. A lot of illegal activity was taking place. You put the police department over there, a lot of that's going to be straightened out. You put the courts over there, where every day you got hundreds of people coming there, where you have people, then restaurants start showing up. Where you have people, other amenities start showing up. When you improve the landscape and the lighting, which we put in place, a replacement of all the lighting system all across the city in every neighborhood. When you look up at a street light now, you don't see that yellow light that used to be there, that sodium mercury vapor light. You see a LED light that's there. My administration put that in there to bring light to neighborhoods and communities. But what a lot of people don't know is that those lights can also be used to put Wi-Fi into every neighborhood. The wiring is already built into that. You just got to hook it up. I'm saying that we had a lot of different things in the works. But you know what my biggest failing is? I don't brag on myself. I didn't talk about the things that I was doing. I just did the work. And you get a lot of people say, hey, look at me, look what I've done. But had we gone forward with the project in Inslee, we had the BEAT organization, which is Bethel Inslee Action Task Force, that we had committed to giving them money to build new homes around a new park that we were going to build. You talked about Pratt City. You go and look at Pratt 1 Park, that park that sits there right by the library. That didn't exist before William Bell put the plans in place to make it happen. And the same architectural design, landscape designer that designed Railroad Park, designed that park as well. Because I wanted Pratt City to have the same quality of a park that they had downtown. And we want to do that all over. If you look at that fire station that sits on Dugan Avenue, it's a fire station that looks better than any fire station in the city, because I want the citizens of Pratt City to know that we were willing to invest in their community. Now, the other thing, still talking about the Inslee area, and I'm going to close out by talking about North Birmingham. But we invested a lot of money over there in the Crossplex. And if you look outside the Crossplex, wonder now, Inslee Avenue, that street has been renovated. It was renovated with money and plans that I put in place, and it leads all the way down to 20th Street. The next 20th Street, Inslee, after you go across the interstate there. So that's why putting the fire station and all of those other amenities would have connected the progress that's being made over there at the Crossplex and 5 Points West with the revitalization of the Inslee area. North Birmingham is another area that was on my radar screen. We didn't put any plans in place, but the plans that I have is to bring entertainment production companies that we've been in contact with now over in Atlanta and Georgia. They're busting at the seam. They don't have room for all of the film production crews and production organizations that they need. And they need an outlet. The natural outlet for everything that's going over there is Birmingham. But you've got Savannah, you've got Chattanooga, you've got Augusta. They're all trying to get the same thing. North Birmingham could be an ideal place. And I've had people come and look at North Birmingham. They're willing to invest over there. Oftentimes, strangers will come in and see jewels where we just see, rocks. And you got a lot of people that see jewels in our community that, if given the right leadership, we can turn those communities around.
Thank you, Mayor.
Quite welcome. And I hate to be long-winded. Yes. We had Wesley Snipes. There's a gentleman named Jazzy Faye. And I want y'all to look up Jazzy Faye. It's Jazzephe. Now, Jazzy tried to act like he a hip-hop street dude, but he actually went to Juilliard and very brilliant in the music producer. Just about all the music that you hear nowadays coming out of Atlanta, Jazzy Faye is a producer on that. One of the things that we wanted to do when the hotel was built at the Civic Center, and that where the restaurants are uptown, we wanted to build a studio on top of that. But there was a gentleman, I can't think of Charles' last name, who was the attorney for most of the top recording artists there in Atlanta. He was Charles Mathis. Charles Mathis, in addition to the attorney that represented Wesley Snipes, they wanted to invest in a recording studio on top of the uptown restaurants that had a connection over to the hotel, where people could go from the hotel over to the studio without going, in the public, because these recording artists, they record 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Unfortunately, Charles passed away before that could be realized, but these are the type of industries that I'm talking about bringing in here to train our students. I've got another young man, Scott Julian. Now, you may not know who Scott Julian is, but if you saw Coming to America 1 and 2, Scott Julian does the makeup for Eddie Murphy. If you saw those different characters that Eddie Murphy played, Scott Julian, who was raised right here in Birmingham. He was born in New Jersey, but he was sent down here. His grandmother raised him. He's now a makeup artist to the stars. Scott wants to start a school that teaches other individuals how to do production makeup. That's a little bit different than what you ladies do every day. But those are the type of people that I want to bring into Birmingham to not only create jobs, but change the whole flavor of the city of Birmingham.
You'll need to repeat it so it gets on.
Not going all the way back to Six Flags. What is the wall that we have in Birmingham to stunt our growth? Because everybody always says we're supposed to be Atlanta, and it started with Six Flags. But let's go past Six Flags. And what is the stumbling block that we have to keep us from getting to where we need to be as a city?
I've always said that the city of Birmingham is like that circus elephant. If you've ever seen the circus come to town and they unload the elephants, whether they unload them off the train or in on a semi truck, they'll take those elephants off, and then they'll put a little steel stake in the ground. They tie a chain around the elephant's leg, and the elephant just stand there. He thinks he's attached to that stake in the ground by that chain, when all the elephant has to do is just lift his feet and walk. Birmingham has that same issue. We are more than what we think we are. We can do more than what we think we can do. But oftentimes we listen to the naysayers. We become fearful of stepping out there, doing things differently. And we've got to have leadership that's willing to step out there, even though people may not want to follow you at the time. Because going back to Carver High School, I mentioned we took Carver High School out of that flood zone. But I remember going to a town hall meeting to have that discussion. And some of the parents said, why are you closing down our school? I graduated from Carver High School over there in that floodplain, and I want my children to graduate from there. I had people that complained about putting it over there on that old golf course. I think it's called Spring Hill or Spring something golf course, where you had 5 golfers who played there. You taking away our golf course. Nobody wanted to follow. Nobody wanted to follow. But as a leader, you have to take people where they don't want to go if you believe that you're taking them in the right direction.
And I just have one final question. I think you started to answer it there. You mentioned the previous election cycle in 2017 and, of course, the results of that. Mm-hmm. We hear the message, we hear the experience, we hear the vision, we hear the passion. This generation is all about connection and communication. So just a question, and you started to allude to it here. What are you doing to connect with, communicate with, help motivate, and bring that hope and life and light to this generation of Birminghamians, including Birmingham voters?
Pastor, the whole way of campaigning has changed. I came from an old school generation that believed in getting out there, knocking on doors, meeting with organizations, and building up support that way. Now with the new technology, this is your campaign manager. This is your campaign planner. This is your campaign everything. This is how you communicate with people. And in the last election, I did not make that transition. I made that transition now. And we're doing the things necessary to communicate with people, to get the truth out there. I indicated before that I'm not prone to brag on myself, but I have to tell people what I've done, just like the question was asked about schools. A lot of people didn't know all the things that I've done, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what I've done. A lot of people were not aware that the 21st century policing program that the current mayor is talking about maybe implementing in his next administration, I was one of the architects of the 21st century policing program. A lot of people are not aware that the U.S. Justice Department sent me to Ferguson, Missouri to find out what happened when Michael Brown was killed by that police officer, and we found out that 99% of the police officers didn't live in the city that they were policing. And they weren't controlled by the mayor of that city, but they were controlled by a police board at the county level. And all the money that they collected from these poor cities went to this county board that then redistributed back to the police officers. And the reason Michael Brown was killed on that day, not because the police officer knew that he had had an altercation with the owner of the store, but he saw Michael Brown jaywalking across the street and he wanted to give him a ticket. Michael Brown thought he was coming at him because of the conflict that he had at the store, and it was a misunderstanding, and they got into it, and Michael Brown ended up dead. Well, the Justice Department sent me there to find that information out. I gave that back to them. They then started putting things in place as to how we see black youth, because you had Trayvon Martin at the same time. I was sent over to Geneva, Switzerland, to speak to the Human Rights Institute, Human Rights Commission, headed up by the UN, to talk about these types of issues on behalf of the United States. We came back here. President Obama identified 23 mayors, of which I was one of the 23. Michael Nutter, the mayor of Philadelphia, Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, they were the co-chairs. But they put me as chairman of the committee to start looking at how we can improve the image of our young black males. And the report that we sent to the president was the basis of which he started My Brothers Keepers initiative. Remember that he came out with that? Out of that My Brothers Keepers initiative, they looked at, well, how can we give people job skills? Because that's part of the process. We got many young people being idle out here. They came up with a program called Tech Hire, in which they were going to put anywhere between $5 to $10 million in communities all across this country to train people for those jobs that go unfilled each and every day. In Birmingham, we have about 1,500 tech jobs every day that are unfilled. Well, Birmingham was the second city behind Philadelphia to receive a $6 million grant. Why did we receive that grant? Because we put together an application. I went over to UAB, got help from UAB to put that program in place, that we got the $6 million, and now they call it Innovate Birmingham, in which the current administration and others brag about, oh, well, UAB did this, that, and the other. No, William Bell was the one that took it to UAB and worked with the previous administration to get the money so that we're now training young people in the community. So my biggest thing is, I was campaigning old school, but there's a new way of doing things, and I'm very trainable. Okay?
I'd like to ask you a question, too. In regards that you kind of were alluding to it as you were going here, there are a lot of programs that come online because administrations change.
Yes.
I'd like for you to just share, if you would, programs that may have been conceived in your administration, begun or set up, that are now being established. Just give you an opportunity to do that are being established, and say it, okay, here's what we're doing, but it actually started in your administration, and the ideas. And with that first part of the question, what's coming online that was established in the Bell administration? What will the new Bell administration, if elected, what other type plans will you implement? See, we can see what you've done coming to pass now? What are you looking forward to?
Going back to the whole issue about crime, we started a program that was called a Violence Reduction Initiative, in which we reached out to, first of all, we identified where most of the problems were coming from in our neighborhoods and our communities. And there's about 1% of our population that causes about 90% of the crime in our community. Many of those individuals are young folks who are idle, don't have anything to do. Young people bond real easily with other individuals. You know, I used to tell people all the time, I used to belong to a gang growing up. And they look at me funny. I say, yeah, it was called the Boy Scouts. Okay? Because every young person wants to belong, wants to feel like, you know, somebody got my back. And when you have that criminal bond that comes together, you got to find ways to break that cycle. And the Violent Reduction Initiative was designed to break that bond and to establish new positive bonds. Along with that, we had what we call Ban the Box, whereby any ex-felon would have the opportunity to apply for a job. Because, you know, if we truly mean that when we send somebody to jail and they've served their time, that they paid their debt to society, we should have a mechanism to bring them back into society. And oftentimes when they get out and they fill out a job application, it has on there, have you ever been arrested? Are you an ex-felon or whatever? And they have to check that box. We remove that box from applying for a job with the city of Birmingham. All of that was that the VRI, and the Ban the Box, that was designed to start giving individuals hope that they could re-enter society and change their way. And we didn't just identify those individuals. We found out what's going on in your life. How did you get bogged down in the court system? What can we do, if you don't have a driver's license because you got too many tickets, and then you started selling drugs, trying to, pay off the tickets and all these other things so you could, drive again. We eliminated all of that. We had counselors that worked with those individuals to set them back on the right trail. But we also had, that was the carrot. We also had a stick that if anybody in your little circle of friends do something illegally, we're going to snatch all of y'all up. Now, some people said that was profiling. Yes, it was profiling from the standpoint, we know who causes the problem. And we used to tell those individuals that you have a high percentage chance of being the perpetrator of a violent crime or the victim of a violent crime because of those individuals that you circulate in. That was the type of program that I put in place, but it was ended with the current administration. Just about every program that we had has been ended. And I'm a firm believer that there has to be continuity in government. I replaced former Mayor Larry Langford. There were many individuals that worked in his administration that I could have just, with the stroke of a pen, said, you're out of here. But I didn't. They were doing their job. They were doing the right thing. And I gave them an opportunity to prove themselves under the Bell administration. There were several projects and programs. The Crossplex, that was not a William Bell idea. That was Larry Langford's idea. But it never got off the ground. I've got pictures where we had the groundbreaking, where I had the groundbreaking and found the money to put in place to actually build the Crossplex. But I give Larry Langford all the credit. Now, I could have walked away and said, hey, that's over with. We're not going to find $50 million. We're going to do something else with that $50 million. The other issue about this new stadium that's going up, I was very reluctant to make a commitment before I left the office of mayor to building that stadium. And here's why. You recall when UAB announced that they were shutting down their football program. About 2 months prior to that time, I think it was in the October time frame, I met with the president, and I realized this is going out over the air because I want this out there. I met with the president of UAB, Dr. Watts, and he said that they were doing an evaluation of all of their sports program, and that in that evaluation, there may be a need to cut some programs out depending on what they find out. And right now, football may be one of the areas that they cut back on. He said, but we won't know until we get the report. That will be sometime in February. And he said, we will make a decision in February, or late February or early March, as to what programs we'll keep, what programs we cut. This was in the October-November time frame. If you recall, in that year, December of that year, UAB for the first time won over 50% of their games. They won 6 games. They became bowl eligible for the first time in their history. Immediately after that, in December, the president announced that they were shutting down UAB football. The media came to me and said, well, you know, Mr. Mayor, what do you know about this? And I said, the only thing I know is that the president told me that a decision would not be made until February or March. Obviously, I've been misled, okay? That was the first sign of conflict between UAB and myself. If you recall, the president, excuse my language in church, well, he caught the devil about his decision. I started to say something, but he caught the devil about his decision. And then after about a year, he announced that UAB football would be coming back, but it was going to take them another year to ramp back up. So it was shut down for basically 2 years. Prior to them playing their first game, I got a call from the president to come and meet with him, his finance director, and his athletic director over at UAB. They put the question to me whether or not the city would be willing to build them a football stadium on UAB campus. And I told them then, no, I am not going to spend city resources to build a stadium for UAB on UAB campus. That's just not what the city does. UAB got a whole lot of money, okay? At the same time, the University of South Alabama went to the city of Mobile, asking the city of Mobile to build them a campus. The city told them no. What did USA do? They went and built their own a football stadium with their own money. When I told them no, and my reasons for it, they said, well, what about taking the money from the Civic Center, the money that the Civic Center had set aside to build a stadium, and, you know, build that on UAB campus? I said, well, I can't speak for the Civic Center. I just know that the state legislature has identified the footprint by which the Civic Center can build, spend money on. It's a geographic designation, and then they have certain taxes that goes into the fund. I think hotel tax, auto tax, and several other type taxes that was sitting there to build that stadium. I said, so, you know, you have to take that up, but I would not be in favor of that. We had a meeting over at the Civic Center because the mayor sits on the Civic Center Authority, in which they asked for a commitment from the city. I said, the most that the city, what the city would commit would be $1 million. But that's with the understanding that $1 million would come from the county, $1 million would come from UAB, $1 million would come from the Civic Center Authority and the state. We would have $5 million that I felt with that amount of money, we could have built a larger stadium, well, not a larger stadium, but a stadium that was somewhat enclosed so you could utilize it 365 days a year, okay, with that amount of money. UAB said, no, we're not going to put any money in it. The only thing we're going to do, we're willing to have a lease, to lease the facility for $1 million a year, but for only 10 years. I said, wait a minute, you lease it for 10 years. What about the other 20 years if you decide to walk away? What we going to do? And they could walk away at any point in time. The county said, well, we're not in a position because we just came out of bankruptcy. We don't want to get into any long-term debt, this, that, the other. Civic Center said, well, we're going to spend all of our money on refurbishing the old arena, refurbishing the theater, the concert hall, the theater, and all that other stuff. And that's construction that's going on down there now. I said, well, until everybody's willing to put in, I'll just hold my cards. I'll just sit back here. The election came up. I lost the election, but I had the opportunity to speak to the current mayor in Washington, D.C. And some people, they got a picture of me and the current mayor that they float around saying we in cahoots. Well, he walked over to me. He asked me this question. And again, I'm putting it out over the public. He asked me the question. He said, well, what do you think about the Civic Center and building that stadium for UAB? And I told him exactly what I told you all about I wouldn't put it. The most I would put in would be 1.5, but that would be with the understanding that everybody else would put money in as well. He said, that's a good idea. Next thing I know, he came back to Birmingham. He committed $3 million. $3 million a year for the next 30 years to go into that stadium. Now, that's $3 million that could go into the neighborhoods that you talked about, $3 million that could go into the school system, $3 million that could go into roads, $3 million could go into economic development. It could have gone to any number of places. But it's building a stadium over there. Now, I'm not saying that the stadium wasn't needed, but you got an open-air stadium. The reason why the SEC moved out of Legion Field and went over to Atlanta, well, there's a whole lot of reasons. But I remember there was a game that was supposed to be played in December, and it was freezing cold rain. And they said, we can't have this because we're going to Atlanta to go into that beautiful dome stadium that they had over there. That's why the SEC moved their championship over. One of the reasons. They got several reasons for it. But I just thought that we could do more. We could do more had we all banded together. And that effort was not there.
Again,
yes.
Good to have you again, Mr. Bell.
Yes.
2 quick questions. I understood you to say that you allow people from a former administration to remain employed with you when you took office.
Yes.
Led right into my question. There are 2 positions in the city of Birmingham that I'm kind of befuddled about, and I can't seem to grasp or understand what they do. One position is this guy who's the mediator or spokesperson for the LGBTQTWR
Liaison.
and all this kind of stuff. He's the liaison guy.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy is supposed to be the liaison between the police department.
That's a female. Well.
Okay, between the police department. No, this is a guy who's between the police department and the clergy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, then you got the guy.
I thought you were talking about the LGBTQ.
Okay, then that's a female.
Yeah, right.
Is it your intent to keep these 2 positions? And what will be their purpose? What do they do? And how are those positions funded? And who asked for them?
No, but he asked for transparency and openness, and I'm a firm believer in that. I don't see the purpose other than keeping a campaign commitment that was made to that community that was there. Someone asked me, well, why didn't you have any LGBTQs working in your administration? I had a bunch of them working in my administration, but I didn't ask nobody who you sleeping with. All I want to know, are you doing the job? We get hung up too often by putting labels on people when we just need to, if you're doing the work that's needed to serve the public, then fine, you can work for me any day, every day. I don't ask no questions about your background, just don't bring it into the office, okay? Just don't bring it into the office. And now we have a different type situation because I judge people by the quality of their character and how they treat me and how I interact with them. So I'm on a whole different level when it comes down to that issue. I don't hold no grudges against anybody. I don't try to judge anybody. But I expect everybody to do something productive for the citizens of Birmingham. No. I mean, we can absorb that. We can do other things to help people. And to give you some example, again, I don't make no judgments. If people want to celebrate something, that's their business. If they come in and ask for a permit to hold a parade, I'll be the first one to give them a permit to hold a parade. If they ask for additional services that's open to everybody else, I'll be the first one to provide those services and not hold those services back. But we get caught up in a lot of the politics of things. And my religion is my religion. There are a lot of things that I believe that I don't expect you to believe, but it's my belief, and I'm not going to try to push it off on you. I just try to be an example as to how I live my life. And then you make your own judgment about William Bell. Any questions?
Well, I think that was a good conclusion to where we are. With no other questions that are there, I want to thank you, Mr. Bell, Candidate Bell, former Mayor Bell, want to thank you for sharing with this group. And as we say, we're going to distribute this for the community, for them to know. And if there are any parting remarks that you'd like to say before I just kind of conclude it, I'll give you that opportunity.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to stand before you and offer myself for service to the community again. I'll reiterate, I'm not perfect. Did I do everything 100% right the last time that I was mayor? I doubt it. But will I try each and every day as the future mayor to be an example of the type of leadership that we need to move Birmingham forward for all of its citizens? And I promise you that I'll make a commitment that every day that I walk into that office, after I say my prayers, that I'll work for the betterment and the improvement of the quality of life for everyone who exists within the borders of the city of Birmingham.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And so as I conclude this meet and greet, what we've had, I want it to be understood that this is of the Gatekeepers Association, the church leaders and pastors of Gatekeepers Association of Alabama. And a lot of people make misrepresentation and they think that this is Guiding Light Church. I need to make a disclaimer. This is not, well, make a statement. This is not Guiding Light Church. And this is Bishop Lowe, who happens to be involved as a member of the Gatekeepers. And we have put this on so we can make that clear, that there's a delineation there. This is not in any way dealing with the Guiding Light Church. It is associated with the Gatekeepers Association, and it is a forum that the Guiding Light Church allows for information to go to the public.